Katie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for
We're all
having
so
me.
excited to chat with you.
Thank you.
We just saw a really awesome reel, but before we dig into all the work that you've done at Bad Robot, I kind of want to take a step back and talk about how you got to where you are today. So throughout your career, you've really operated at the intersection of media, politics, and impact. You were a legislative assistant as your first job. Then you founded the production company that was politically focused, First Tuesday Media. And of course, today you're doing a lot of work with Bad Robot. So how have you navigated your career from, when you first started out to now? Is there a through line or any themes that you've taken into consideration as you made your next choices?
Such a good question. And I just want to start by saying I'm going to break all the MBA rules, I'm sure, in all of my answers today. And I'm really humbled to talk about the work that I've been lucky enough to be a part of over the years with all of you, because I know this is a room full of mostly women and some excellent male allies, I'm assuming, who are far better and deeper and sort of more schooled and studied in the journey one takes. I will speak to mine, but it will sound possibly very sophomoric, so just bear with me. My philosophy about work and career has always been kind of follow your nose. Be in love with the thing that you are doing. I remember hearing early on when I was in college that, I think I found later to be a very famous adage, but, if you are lucky enough to do the thing that you love every day, your career won't feel like work. And so at different stages of my life, I have, leaned into things that I was passionate about. And on a separate note, I happened to be married to somebody who knew what he wanted to do since he was 8 years old, and I never had that. So I look at my career as one in chapters, and I'm really grateful that I've come to a healthy relationship with that, because I think there were periods of times where I thought maybe I'm not enough, I'm not focused enough on the through line or on the ladder or the 5-year plan. My sort of trajectory has been a little bit more unconventional, but always based on things that I deeply cared about or loved to do.
That's awesome. Obviously, Bad Robot is a company that is born out of passion. And you've really grown it from a traditional production company, films and television shows, but it really looks like you have so many different divisions now. You have Good Robot, your philanthropy arm, you have Loud Robot, your music arm, there's a gaming arm. So how did you grow the company from a smaller production company to where it is today? And what do you think of when you try to think of new growth opportunities? How do you identify that?
So my partner in the company is also my husband, J.J. Abrams, and when he started this company over a decade ago, it was very much an afterthought. He was a writer and a producer and director, and was given advice by a studio executive, why are you kind of not organizing yourself around the work that you do? You could get a pod deal at a studio, and JJ had never heard of anything like that before, but pursued it, got a deal, and was kind of still in the early years just using that infrastructure without a lot of thought around it being an actual company. It was just more a vehicle through which he was doing his day job. And around that time, the company I was a part of, First Tuesday Media, which was a group of 5 Hollywood producers who came together kind of very quietly to make media with directors and writers on behalf of political candidates, but we did it in a kind of light fingerprint way. And we were sharing the same space. And in the political world, 2-year cycles, as we all know, and so in between some of our busy periods, I was just around in the building, and a lot of the people who were starting to be hired would come to me and say, do you think JJ's ever gonna give us a review? Or how do we figure out if we're getting a raise? Or I want to get a mortgage and I need to understand what my job security is here. And it just started to become clear that, again, neither of us having an MBA, one of us had a little bit more space to imagine the real sort of underpinnings that we all have to, juggle when choosing a career and as part of our larger life. So I started getting involved in the company then, and what I will say since that time, and that's probably been, since my involvement, almost 10 years now, much more intensively the last 6 to 7. And one of my old colleagues, Allie, is here somewhere. Where are you, Allie? There. So Allie and I had some couple of years of crossover, I guess, together. During the last, probably 7 or 8 years, we got really excited about formalizing things. And as we did, we just saw other opportunities. And we took that same kind of approach, which is if something was interesting or delightful and we had an opportunity to explore it, we did. And so we have been working, we have a Bad Robot games division, but for 9 years we've been working on the same game with Epic and Share, who are the gamers behind Fortnite. And our game that we seeded 9 years ago is about to come out probably in Q3 of this year. It will be the first thing post Fortnite that the company, Epic, releases. So we seed things in small ways. We experiment, and we don't over-resource them. We try to keep them at the appropriate size and scale till we figure out if there's actually a business there. Mm-hmm. Same thing with our music department. We had a music producer in our company for over a decade, but we had an opportunity with Capitol Records after having a long track record of having experimented where they were willing to take a risk, and now we have actual a label, Loud Robot, as you mentioned. And Good Robot is our social impact arm within the company, so that is very much not a separate business. But I think our approach has been keep your eyes open, work with people who are interesting and creative and accountable, and build from there. But we try to do it with the right amount of caution and excitement. So.
This is going to be a tough question to ask because you do have so much going on. But what project have you been most proud of or excited about? And is there anything coming down the pipeline that you, aside from the video game, which sounds really exciting, and anything that you'd like to share in terms of your experience over the past 10 years?
Well, I think there are so many. Allie was there during a period where we had a visual effects company. And there were so many amazing creative things that came out of that, they were kind of like the Swiss Army knife of our post, production. And lots to be proud of out of there. There are obviously the big titles that people know about. What I'm most proud of, I believe, is our team, ultimately. We just have extraordinary people, and we are intentional about how we build the team. And we weren't always in the beginning, and I think the last 5 or 6 years, we started to look around and really see, right around the time that April Rain, who was the woman responsible for the Oscars So White hashtag, challenged the industry to really lift our heads up out of the sand and see what we were not doing and who wasn't at the table. And we have, changed the composition of our company in a way that has been a massively important business differentiator for us. And, I can't remember where we started, but you can imagine, as a lot of industries, but Hollywood particularly, for so long, people hired people they knew, and that ended up often being people who looked like them. So we instituted the Bad Robot rule 5 years ago, which is, some people might be familiar with the Rooney Rule, which I was speaking at something yesterday and I got in trouble for using profanity around, so I won't do that in this lovely crowd. But, the Rooney Rule is really, it's such an insult. It's like if there's a job opening, one woman or one person of color should be considered for the position out of the entire pool. So we wanted to obviously improve upon that, and so we recruit in proportion to the population of the country. So every time we have a job opening at our company, at least 50% of our candidates need to be women, and 40% at least need to be people of color. And always hire the best person, but we weren't availing ourselves to the best talent because we were kind of in a very closed network of referrals. So this has been extraordinary, and I might be off by one or two, I eyeball this all the time. We have a dashboard, that our HR department puts out every week just to make sure that we're, tracking who we are and how we are. And we're at 55% women, over 50% of our leadership team is women, and we are at 45% people of color right now. And so I feel like we've ended up looking like the country we live in. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to meet everybody that we needed to know and then get the best. And of course, the best comes from every part of, every different part of the country that has often, not been at the table. So that's a thrill for us. That's what I'm most proud of.
That's honestly incredible.
Yeah.
I would say that if more companies were able to do something or decided to do something like that, you would really see a sea change in how our companies look, for sure.
Well, the truth is, and listening to your dean speak, you hear these statistics around the global challenge in the 99 years, so there's going to be parity. And then you hear that the United States of America is 51st when it comes to, gender parity and equity. It's just bonkers. The truth is, in any business, whatever CEO prioritizes gets attention and gets movement. That's it. Mm-hmm. So these are not problems that can't be solved. And every time there's a business outcome that a CEO or a board has determined they want to achieve, they set tactics against it, and then the entire operation moves, in lockstep towards it. The same thing can be said about, diversifying our leadership and our entire companies as a whole. So there's just no excuse to not be better than we are, and that any of this should be taking 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really is a testament to Bad Robot's philosophy. I think Bad Robot's always been a first mover in terms of standing up for the values that it believes in. It donated its episodic fees to fight against anti-abortion laws in Georgia. We talked about the diversity policy that you implemented and then followed through with. So how do you actually effectively blend your day-to-day business processes and your focus on the long-term strategy with these social causes that are so important and core to the company?
Well, I don't think they're social causes. I think they're just part of our values, and we try to live our values, whether we're in our private life or in our public life. And there are tons of opportunities in this industry to, because of the platform that we have, to just do the right thing. It's not complicated, ultimately. And it is risky, I guess, on some level for companies, especially, we're a privately held company. For a publicly held company, I understand that there are other concerns. But I don't, we try to look at the business case for what we're doing. So in the case of the forced pregnancy bill that the Georgia governor signed into law earlier last year, we have employees there. We have women. We have a show that is operating down there. And the idea that any women on our production or any other production would not have, the bodily control that they are legally, by the Constitution now, allowed to have, that has workplace ramifications. Mm-hmm. It has very deeply personal ones for us as well, but putting that aside, we have a responsibility to our employees and to our productions to make sure that they have safe, fair, and dignified workspaces. And, they're doing their work in states that recognize their liberties. And so, that's another example, though, I think, of why diverse leadership teams and environments are so critical. When we first heard about that bill being signed into law, our first instinct as two liberal white co-CEOs was, well, we've got to pull out. And a very good friend of mine who's a woman of color said, what are you doing? What do you mean you've got to pull out? Have you talked to any of the women leaders on the ground in Georgia? Have you considered what that might mean economically? And of course we hadn't, because the hubris of just feeling like we knew it was the right answer, and had the great privilege to get to talk to Stacey Abrams about what strategically is the right thing for women in Georgia right now. What would be helpful, not would be satisfying, but what would be helpful. And so I think anytime you have multiple perspectives, in your kitchen cabinet and beyond, you're just going to make better decisions. We know there's a business case for it. I think gender diverse leadership teams make the right decision. I think it's something like 72% of the time, where single sex, leadership teams make the right decision, something like 58%.
Yeah.
There's dollars in there. There is a real business case for, in all parts of our lives, particularly in the workplace, making sure that we've got balance and perspective throughout everything.
That's amazing. And we saw that Bad Robot is extremely intentional in fostering a culture there that's creative and inclusive. And it was, one of the main features of the video that we played. So how do you actually foster so many different people coming together to build a culture like that? And how has that impacted the evolution and the growth of Bad Robot over the years?
Yeah, it's only a positive. I think we've moved from our thinking about, all these words can get really perverted and overused and then mean nothing. Diversity and inclusion. Yeah, who's including who? We even are really interrogating a lot of the language. So we're in a good place representatively, I would say. But our next challenge is, what does it feel like to belong? Because that's really where you get everyone's deep value. It's not just that people are in the room, but that people are in the room completely confident in their ability to speak, to lead, to contribute. And so I think as we focus on that, we're only going to get more, upside on the creative front. We want everybody to bring their whole selves to work. Mm-hmm. And when they don't, because they're afraid of harassment or they're afraid of bias or anything else like that, there is, again, another opportunity cost to get to that. Forget about the human one, which we can all, recognize. There's a business case to be made that everyone who is in your space should feel safe, fair, and dignified and encouraged to, bring their superpowers to bear against whatever the assignment is.
Yeah. I want to take a little bit of time to pivot a little because this is such a great entry point to the next thing that I wanted to touch on, which is more recently you've really, outside of Bad Robot, have spoken up and stepped up for an entire gender in terms of equity in the workplace and your work through Time's Up. And so you were one of the founding organizers of Time's Up, and you really helped drive and give structure to a movement that has changed the conversation. Today, the world is actually really listening to our voices and actually responding to it. That was back in early 2018 when you worked on the founding of this organization. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and the transition from there to 2 years later, where we are now today?
Complicated and amazing. I would say we're a nonprofit, but refer to ourselves as a mission-driven startup because it really was, something that, unlike a startup that normally has one or two founders, this easily had a founding membership of 200 women, at least, who could say very fairly that they had something, they had their fingerprints on an important piece of the launch. And that's an extraordinary thing. It's also complicated, right, to kind of harness all of those perspectives and all of the contribution. So the 2 years has actually been really, I think a lot of people understand that the impact of Time's Up was like at the Golden Globes a couple of years ago, on the red carpet, and then it felt like a gotcha space, and then it kind of felt like what happened to our CEO that was there for 4 months and left, and it never probably reads from the outside, I think, over the last 2 years as coherently as we know it to be from the inside. The truth is we have had some significant victories in New York State. Governor Cuomo just passed a bill that is their New York safety agenda that was co-drafted by some of the attorneys at Time's Up. It has extended the statute of limitations for victims of harassment and abuse, which is, and at the time the Catholic Church was the biggest, kind of adversary in that fight. So we've had some really substantial California state law. We've been doing some really important work behind the scenes. consulting with the Google walkout women, with the, athletes at Nike, the women athletes who were being penalized if they took a break for their pregnancies, and a million other very specific targeted workspace. We just held a candidate forum with Fortune magazine. So with our new CEO, Tina Chen, who was Michelle Obama's chief of staff in her previous life, a 25-year corporate lawyer, she is just, I think, going to bring this kind of the inside-outside game that we need in order for there to be real involvement from, the men who we can't do this work without, and the grassroots, organizations, and the sort of networked, the powered network of women who are involved to make sure there's, the impact that we believe is possible and certainly that women deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're kind of seeing that because recently I saw that Time's Up Entertainment released a resource guide to prevent and then report workplace misconduct. Can you talk a little bit about what work went into creating that guide and what you're hoping the impact of that guide and any, support and infrastructure around it would bring to the entertainment industry, and then really any other male skewing industry at all, which is many of them?
Well, first of all, there are a number of different Time's Up chapters. So there's by sector. So there's tech, there's Time's Up healthcare, there's Time's Up advertising, Time's Up entertainment. There's probably 8 of them. And in the Time's Up entertainment chapter, which is based here in Hollywood, that we have great, policy experts who work with advocates and work with actresses and the unions as well, the guilds, and did a deep dive into what was existing law and policy, and then kind of shored it up in a guide that is available for everyone on set. And so, there are projects like that happening all the time. What goes into that is a lot of listening, a lot of learning, and a lot of synthesizing, and then just, for lack of a better word, marketing of it. Making sure people know what their rights are. And I think, across all the sectors, that's a lot of probably the future of what we'll be doing a lot more. Because you're right, this sector is not different from any other when it comes to the bias and abuse and harassment.
And I would be remiss to ask this since we have a very large audience of women, but how would you say is an effective way for all of us to get involved, from just in our everyday lives or on a larger capacity? Well,
I think, first of all, go to timesupnow.com, or .org, sorry, so you can see. There'll be more, there's a lot to do there, but I think that we all have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other to be deep and good in our sisterhood with each other, and to be clear and fair in what our needs and our rights are, and to not be afraid to speak truth to power. And I think the status quo has benefited from us kind of being pitted against each other often in environments, and not encouraged to collaborate, and to share our stories, whether it's around how much we're getting paid or what kind of promotional track we're on or any of those other kinds of workplace things. Because our work is really workplace specific, right? Time's Up. So I think, and then it's identifying in our workplaces who are the men who get it, who are the men who will stand with us when we have a challenge or a question around. Specifically pay equity is, one of the most foundational, I think even low-hanging fruit ways of exposing, a workplace for what their values are and aren't. And if you can get your male colleagues to tell you how much they're making, there's a lot that can happen quickly.
Yeah, I think this concept of being protective of salaries has just been something that's been ingrained in us through our careers, which doesn't really have any foundation or real reason behind it.
No, it's true. And I'll say one other thing, and again, there's a graduate student somewhere in the world who I'm sure has studied this, if not many. But I think one of the big things we're up against is like the foundational design flaws in our workplaces. Because the truth is, it was largely, and again, when I talk about white men, I'm not demonizing. It is just the facts that it is white men who have designed the rules around every environment that we have, our government, our religious institutions, our workplaces certainly. And so when we talk about the places where women fall off, we're talking about them falling off because of rules that were designed without their input. And without a really broad conversation around what value means and what skill and what leadership look like. I think even for women, we have a very we've inherited, an image and an acceptance of what the rules are. And so I think we should, especially, those who are, in the business sector, should be really challenging our assumptions as we go. It's hard to do, but I think it's actually going to be the way we can scale the change faster. Because if we keep trying to fix things around the edges, it's just not going to change for women, not the way the corporate, and even what the requirements are to be on corporate boards. I mean, somebody just made up those rules that you had to have a C in front of your title. There are plenty of people with unbelievable value and wisdom that they could be bringing to bear on a corporate board that are just locked out because of whatever they've, chosen as a career path or not chosen because of, the rules. So I think we should just be challenging all of our assumptions and institutions in a healthy, productive way. But that for me is where I think the big unlock comes from.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, our theme this year is Elevate, and I think this entire conversation really captured that theme and the work that you are doing, the work that Time's Up is doing, and this entire, culture shift is happening right now. And on that note, we're entering a new decade. It's January 2020. What do you think this year and this decade holds for women as we move forward?
I always get in trouble because I'm a little bit of a joy killer when it comes to this question. I don't feel terribly hopeful because what I have seen, and it doesn't mean it's not possible, but here's the fact. There's a quote that gets attributed to a friend of mine, and I think it's, as I dug into it, he actually isn't the only one who said it, so I don't know who it comes from, but I'm going to share it with you all because I love it. It's like, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. It's not. So when I think about the next 10 years for women, and I think about what are the barriers to entry for us and to progress, I think the people who hold the power largely believe that when we come to the table, not for their part, but for our part, for the 53% that is our part, they believe they are being oppressed. And so that triggers a whole set of behaviors and emotions that I think get in the way of us having a ton of progress over the next 10 years. Now, if the people who hold power feel like, oh, actually, this isn't about replacing the patriarchy with the matriarchy. This is about people saying, I'd like a balanced, power structure, racially, and by gender. Then everybody has to kind of make space. It's not a zero-sum game. Right. But if you think about the space that men have largely occupied, the Fortune 500, that's so great. It moved from 5% of male, women CEOs to just under 7, but
37%.
Are you kidding me? And we're asking, like in 10 years. So we have to challenge our institutions, the rules around them, and do it with a lot of creativity, a lot of partnership, and goodwill. Nobody wants to feel bad about themselves. Nobody wants to feel like they're the villain. But the people who do hold the power, I believe, have to start. And by the way, that includes me as a white woman, the privilege I have in that I have to interrogate all the time. So we just have to understand that, what we've been used to holding is not necessarily ours. And we're going to be, I think, much stronger, better, and more profitable in our business lives if we start to see that balance actually is the answer. It's not the enemy.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you.
a very
Thank you.
honest and great answer. I just have one last quick question before we get off the stage. There are a lot of us in this room who are early on in our careers and trying to figure out what to do next. Any words of wisdom?
Oh, God. Just fall in love with what you do. Have great, good friends. Make sure you keep people around you who are going to keep you honest. And work for people who you respect. Don't work for bullies. Just don't. Life is too short. That's my number one thing. When I think about, how much space those kinds of people take up, we just can't give them more oxygen with our presence. So that's my number one thing.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.